96, is that right? Nicole Dosso, she graduated from here in 96, and is, among other things, the newest member of our board of advisors. I don't even know if she knows that yet. We like her so much that we added her to the board of advisors. She's a board of advisors member. She's director of the technical group at SOM, Skidmore, Owings Merrill, one of the largest firms in the world. She's been involved with a lot of projects, two in particular at World Trade Center, 7 World Trade Center and 1 World Trade Center. A lot of awards, I'm going to read a few. 2006 Professional Women in Construction Award, Building Design and Construction Magazine 2012, 40 Under 40. Crane's Business 2012, New York 40 Under 40. She received the 2012 Presidential Citation by the AIA for her work on World Trade Center. She's not only a star, but she's one of ours, and I think a real model for many, if not most, if not all of our students. I'm going to read, just read a couple of sentences here from Fast Company. I believe this is from Fast Company. Yeah, it's a piece written about a year and a half ago in Fast Company, which is a magazine that covers technology and business, but also it has a very strong design section. This says, I think, more than I will be able to say, but I'll just read this. It's written by Carrie Jacobs, a terrific design writer. She says, "Forget about the star architects Daniel Libeskind and David Childs, who dueled incessantly over One World Trade Center's formal qualities and its poetic language. The architect who finally got the damn thing built is someone you probably never heard of." We have. Nicole Dosso, a technical director of the New York office from Skidmore, Owings Merrill. From the end of 2006 until the tower's completion, probably by year's end, Doso had been, as she puts it, the single senior technical coordinator representing SOM on the day-to-day execution of the job. In other words, North America's tallest tower, which could easily have been the world's tallest, is being built by one. And that, in fact, is the title of the article. The tallest tower in the U.S. is being built by one. We're happy about that. We're also very happy that she's a graduate of our school. Nicole has a meeting this afternoon with some students, and I hope we will be seeing more of her. As I said, she's on our board of advisors now. We're really thrilled she took the train. Because if she had taken the plane, she might not be here. Join me in welcoming a fabulous person, a great architect, and a graduate of our school, Nicole Dosso.
Where's the, oh, I just
New York City, the Big Apple, center of the universe, melting pot. These are some of the iconic phrases used to describe the city of New York, my hometown. With an estimated population of over 8.3 million, New York City is the most densely populated city in the United States. This equates to approximately 27,000 people per square mile. In fact, about 1 in every 38 people living in the United States resides in New York City. When asking random individuals what comes to mind when thinking of New York City, typical responses are Statue of Liberty, Times Square, lights of Broadway, restaurants, eclectic neighborhoods, iconic skyscrapers, and a forever evolving skyline. Over the years, I have been asked to discuss One World Trade Center in the context of innovation. Surprisingly, I myself questioned what was innovative about the project. Oxford Dictionary defines innovation as a new method, idea, product. If you ask the media, you will likely hear it took too long. It has a staggering cost set at $3.8 billion and is possibly one of the most debatable structures in the world. One World Trade Center, a publicly owned commercial office building, has 2.6 million square feet of Class A office space, 3 levels of observation deck, a broadcast antenna facility, approximately 55,000 square feet of retail, direct access to the World Trade Center transportation hub, 11 subway lines, and the Port Authority Path Rail system. Alone, One World Trade Center incorporates enough structural steel to construct 6 Eiffel Towers, use of the strongest concrete ever poured in New York City, elevators with a top speed of 2,000 feet per minute, the fastest in the Western Hemisphere, 22 acres of glass, over 1 million feet of conduit, and a structural spire taller than the Statue of Liberty. Is this innovation? To answer that question, we need to step back in history to understand where it all began. April 30th, 1939, the New York World's Fair opened on a former wasteland in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens. It was the 150th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington. The fair covered 1,216 acres. It was 3.5 miles long. The theme, Building the World of Tomorrow. With a look to the future, the fair was planned to be every man's fair. It included a combination of trade show, amusement park, food venues, and a pavilion located in the government zone Hall of Nations titled the World Trade Center, dedicated to world peace through trade. 2 decades following, a proposal for a World Trade Center in New York will be brought to the forefront by Downtown Lower Manhattan Association led by David Rockefeller. Still in existence today, they remain committed in maintaining a business community below Canal Street. From here, the proposal of a World Trade Center from a decade earlier would finally take root. In January 1960, David Rockefeller organized a press conference to describe the details of a proposal for our $250 million World Trade Center complex on 13.5 acres of land to be located on a 3-story podium along the East River adjacent to the Fulton Street Fish Market. The proposal included a single office tower, hotel, international trade mart, and an exhibition hall. The unanswered question, who would finance and develop such a proposal? Attention quickly turned to the Port Authority, a creation of 2 states, New York and New Jersey, who had access to secure financing via tolls from their tunnels and bridges. In March 1961, the Port Authority released a favorable feasibility study that focused on maintaining the presence of a port in New York. However, New Jersey Governor Robert Maynard raised concern that the proposal commercial complex on the east side of Manhattan had little to do with New Jersey. Following an additional feasibility study, an alternate site on the lower west side of Manhattan facing New Jersey would be selected. The site, formerly known as Radio Row, a warehouse district specializing in the sales of radio and electronic equipment, spanning a 13-block area, would form one of the city's first superblocks. In 1962, the Port Authority would employ Minoru Yamasaki as the lead architect, along with Emery Roth & Sons, to begin planning the World Trade Center. It would take 4 years for final building plans to be approved. The plans would call for a World Trade Center consisting of 15 million square feet distributed over 7 buildings. The 2 feature buildings would later become known as the Twin Towers, were planned to become the world's largest buildings. In March 1966, construction of the World Trade Center site would begin. Site preparations were vast and included excavation of over 1 million cubic yards of material. The design and construction of the Twin Towers would employ numerous architectural, engineering, and construction innovations, such as closely spaced structural perimeter tubes allowing for open floor plans beyond the core, and use of express and local elevators in conjunction with sky lobbies to maximize rentable floor space. In October 1970, the North Tower of the World Trade Center site would exceed the height of the Empire State Building, the tallest building in New York City at that time. In April 2011, history would repeat itself. In December 1970, the North Tower was topped off at 1,368 feet, with the South Tower following 7 months later at 1,362 feet. December 1975, legendary top-of-the-world observation deck would open at the South Tower. It was estimated that the observation deck would receive 80,000 visitors a day. 6 months later, a 50,000 square foot restaurant called Windows of the World would top the North Tower. May 1987, developer Larry Silverstein opens the door to neighboring building 7 World Trade Center. In May 2006, once again, history would repeat itself. To address high vacancy rates at the World Trade Center in September 1998, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey announced they would competitively bid a 99-year lease to a private entity for 1, 2, 4, and 5 World Trade Center and approximately 425,000 square feet of retail. It would be Silverstein Properties, in conjunction with the Westfield Group, who would make a $3.2 billion bid and win the lease of the 10.4 million square feet of commercial property at the World Trade Center. In July 2001, the key to the Twin Towers would be turned over to developer Larry Silverstein of Silverstein Properties. Who would have imagined that a mere 2 months later, America would experience the largest attacks on our country since Pearl Harbor? The morning of September 11th started for me like many days prior. Always an early riser, I was at my desk working at the office of Skidmore, Owings Merrill on the 24th floor of 14 Wall Street, a short distance from the World Trade Center site, when American Airlines Flight 11 flew into the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Immediately following the impact, I ran to the exterior windows and saw what looked like confetti, reminiscent of a Lower Manhattan ticker tape parade I had witnessed for New York Yankees World Series win years earlier. Knowing we were at least a month away from the end of baseball season, I further observed and realized the shreds of paper were burning. Still, after all this time, I can recall in detail what I was wearing, the clear blue sky typical of a September New York City morning, what I was eating at my desk, working on, and where I was exactly as each of the events of the day unfolded. I was feet away from the exterior glazing when the second plane hit the South Tower. The impulse caused the windows to shudder back and forth. It felt as if time was moving in slow motion. As I ran back to my desk, my phone was ringing. It was my father calling, warning me that the media was already claiming there was suspicion that these were attacks of terrorism. Till that day, the word terrorism is a word I do not believe I had ever uttered. Moments following, senior partner of SOM, David Childs' calm and comforting voice could be heard through the office advising of the uncertain situation. I grabbed my bag and with no hesitation immediately ran to the elevator bank. I can recall being in the elevator on the way down with colleagues announcing we should have walked, and then advising everyone to exit towards Pine Street in case the New York Stock Exchange, directly across from the office, was next to be targeted. The holes in the tower with fire radiating from them will forever be etched in my memory. Via foot, I was in Chinatown when the South Tower collapsed, and on 23rd Street when the North Tower collapsed shortly following. Huddled around a car with a radio blaring, I learned that American Airlines Flight 77 had crashed into the Pentagon. At 34th Street, prior to parting ways with a colleague, we exchanged phone numbers and hugged. I would have no way of knowing that it would be almost 10 years to the day when we would unexpectedly reunite. It was not until I reached 42nd Street, reading the news streaming across the electronic billboards of Times Square, that I learned American Airlines Flight 93 had crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I was alone and with no means of reaching my family, and the gravity of the situation was alarming. Like many, on the eve of 9/11, at approximately 5:20 p.m., I watched in horror 7 World Trade Center tower collapse on national television. It would be the 3rd tower that day which would collapse in New York City. I read later that 7 World Trade Center was designed by Emery Roth & Son. It was clad in red masonry, situated above a Con Ed power station, and was 47 stories tall. I recall, after watching the tower collapse, full of emotion from a horrific day, that I had no recollection of ever seeing this building, even though I must have walked past it hundreds of times over the years. In November 2002, 13 months following the events of September 11th, a groundbreaking ceremony was held at 7 World Trade Center and the Con Ed substation. The redesigned substation, which would not only fully replace what was lost on September 11th, but would be sized to accommodate the electric demands of the World Trade Center site to be rebuilt. The groundbreaking ceremony was attended by distinguished dignitaries: Larry Silverstein, members of Silverstein Property, members of Con Ed, building professional, construction trade personnel, and myself. Lowry Silverstein and his organization would do the unthinkable in a New York City market where the focus for real estate developers has long been focused on maximum gross floor area. He would not only move ahead on a project without an anchor tenant, but would make the decision to reduce the overall footprint of the building with the goal of reopening access through Greenwich Street. This would allow for the restoration of the connection from Tribeca through the World Trade Center site and south to Battery Park. A triangular park across from the Seven World Trade Center, designed by landscape architect Ken Smith, would occupy the balance of the building's original footprint, located between the restored Greenwich Street and West Broadway. The park created public open views, allowed for enhanced light and views of the building, and provided a visual connection to the 65-foot wide by 14-foot high glass lobby art wall featuring a moving text installation designed by Jenny Holzer. Innovative? I think so. In 2006, Seven World Trade Center would become the first building to be rebuilt at the original World Trade Center site following the events of 9/11. The project employed emphasis on building enhancements, focused on life safety, including improved smoke exhaust, emergency communications, 30-inch cast-in-place concrete walls surrounding the egress stairs, stair pressurization, area of rescue assistance, photoluminescent markings, and battery backup for exit stair lighting. In addition to life safety enhancement, the building would focus on promoting environmental design. To name a few: increased open space, stormwater collection for park irrigation, exterior wall maximizing interior day lighting for energy conservation and quality of life, and recycling of construction waste. Seven World Trade Center would become the first commercial office project in New York City to receive the US GBC LEED Gold status. In March 2006, at the opening ceremony, I joined colleagues in Silverstein Properties for a ceremonial toast in the lobby of the building. Professionally, this would become one of the greatest days of my career. The tower opened in the absence of any tenants, gradually drawing anchor tenant Moody's, an investment company, in 2007, reportedly paying the highest prices ever paid in Lower Manhattan. In September 2011, 10 years following the attacks of 9/11, Silverstein Property would announce that the 52-story, 1.7 million square foot tower was finally 100% leased. 5 years following its opening. In preparation of SOM's 75th anniversary, I was interviewed. As the Lever House had been one of SOM's signature buildings since 1952, the question I was asked was what project did I consider to be a modern-day legacy? Many were surprised that my response was not One World Trade Center. Instead, I responded with Seven. Seven World Trade Center was constructed during a period of time when New York City was grieving at its deepest. Beyond the Twin Towers and Seven World Trade Center, numerous other buildings at the World Trade Center site and the surrounding areas were destroyed or badly damaged on 9/11, such as Fitterman Hall, Verizon Building, St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church, Deutsche Bank, World Financial Center, Millennium Hilton, and countless small businesses that lost their inventory or lacked the financial means to sustain following 9/11. Returning to Wall Street, 1 week following the events of 9/11 was one of the saddest days of my life. The events of the day of 9/11 were unimaginable, and I was too scared and horrified that day to process an emotion of sadness. I recall meeting one of the SOM partners in charge on the platform of the 72nd Street subway station on my way to Lower Manhattan on the morning of September 17, 2001. It was the first day the office would reopen for business. When I arrived, I noticed my desk was covered in dust, my breakfast half eaten, and the drawing I had been working on still flashing on my computer screen. The haste in which I left that morning was evident. There was a smell that I would describe like burning rubber that would last well into 6 months. Police with assault rifles and security presence everywhere. On March 11, 2002, the Municipal Art Society presented the Tribute of Light, an art installation of 88 7,000-watt xenon lights echoing the shape of the Twin Towers. The installation was located adjacent to the World Trade Center, marking the 6-month anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. The illumination reached a height of 4 miles and could be seen throughout New York City. It was on that evening that I retained enough courage to get close enough to the World Trade Center site to fully comprehend the hole in the New York City skyline. It would be years before I would describe a feeling of normalcy would return to Lower Manhattan. The rebuilding of 7 World Trade Center helped in bringing about a positive energy in the midst of despair. It created jobs and provided a means in which to move forward. I would often see Larry Silverstein himself with his pants, hemline rolled, walking around the site, shaking the hands with the construction workers who tirelessly worked in less than ideal conditions. Almost every hard hat adorned an American flag, and it was a feeling of pride everyone involved that I had never seen or experienced before. Legacy. All the while this was happening, in December 2002, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, LMDC, commissioned 7 teams to present plans for the World Trade Center site. Foster & Partners, Meyer Eisman Gwathmey Hall, Peterson Littenberg, Skidmore Owings Merrill, Studio Daniel Libeskind, Think Team, and United Architects. The entries were presented to the public at the Winter Garden of the World Financial Center. Innovator Daniel Libeskind's proposal, titled Memory Foundation, would be selected. In addition to the National September 11th Memorial Museum to honor the victims of 9/11, the plans would include 4 office towers, one of which would have a towering spire to an elevation of 1,776 feet, symbolic to the year of the Declaration of Independence. It would also include the World Trade Center Transportation Hub, 550,000 square feet of retail, and a performing arts center. The proposal would restore New York City's skyline, and the Freedom Tower was set to someday be the tallest building in North America. To address security concerns raised by the New York City Police Department in regard to the proximity of the Freedom Tower to West Street, the building would later be relocated within the master plan of the 16-acre World Trade Center site. In 2005, the final design for the Freedom Tower, which eventually would become known as the One World Trade Center building, would be unveiled by David Childs of Skidmore, Owings Merrill. The design of the tower rises from an almost 200-foot cubic square podium, which is the same proportion of the existing Twin Towers. The square edges of the podium are chamfered back, transforming the square into 8 isosceles triangles. At the top, the plan of this is a square rotated 45 degrees from the base at the podium. The tapering triangular forms are reminiscent of great New York City icons, such as the Chrysler and the Empire State Building. In December 2006, I was selected by SOM to lead the technical team for the One World Trade Center team project. In accepting the position, I gave my word that I would be there till the end. In June 2007, with a team of about 30 architects, SOM completed construction documents for the project. It was a feat. As a technical partner in charge at the time signed each of the 300-plus drawings, I stood and looked on at our accomplishment. June 28, 2007 would mark a major milestone in the rebuilding effort. We were on our way. Over the years, I was surprised every time I would hear someone ask, why is the project taking so long? The below-grade portion of the project is 500,000 square feet. To put this into perspective, this is roughly equivalent to a 13-story tower. The perimeter of the One World Trade Center site borders Port Authority Retail, Port Authority Fan Plant, Transportation Hub, and Concourse, Memorial, and the future Performing Arts Center. Following the events of 9/11, the existing World Trade Center bathtub slurry wall, which was initially been built to hold back the water of the Hudson River, was badly damaged. As part of the initial ground zero recovery operation, the existing wall had to be temporarily stabilized by tiebacks. In addition, for long-term stability, the slurry wall was stabilized by adding a reinforced 30-inch thick concrete liner wall adjacent to the existing condition. Portions of the below-grade and major structural components of the tower had to be constructed over remnants of the existing World Trade Center basement slabs that remained following 9/11 and above the existing path tracks. Needless to say, it was a complicated design, and construction further complicated by limited access and work schedules that had to be coordinated with track outages. To address security concerns, there was significant emphasis placed on the structure of the building. 30-inch thick concrete walls surround the base to a height of 50 feet, protecting lobby occupants and the core of the building, which is constructed of walls in thickness up to 4 feet. Use of high-strength concrete in the range of 10,000 to 4,000 psi. In addition to the 210,000 cubic yards of concrete, there was a total of 6 fabrication shops used to fabricate the 46,000 tons and approximately 30,000 pieces of steel. Methods of construction had to be accounted for in the design of the tower, such as the use of permanent erection steel within the core to allow for the advancement of steel and metal deck placement well in advance of the concrete core. Ring structure around the perimeter of the core to allow for self-rising, reusable formwork to be used. And construction hotels placed within the core to provide structural rigidity prior to concrete placement, as well as used to house construction offices and the well-publicized Subway sandwich shop. These advancements allowed for approximately a 20-floor spread of construction taking place every day, with steel typically 6 floors above the rest, followed by metal deck, concrete shear walls and slabs, stairs, spray fireproofing, curtain wall, and carpentry. One World Trade Center would become the first office tower to rise at the World Trade Center site master plan. While the memorial carved out of the earth speaks of the past and remembrance, One World Trade Center speaks about future and hope. Similar to Seven World Trade Center, the building incorporates advanced life safety systems that exceed requirements of the New York City Building Code and have led the way in developing new standards for high-rise construction in New York. On August 30th, 2012, the final piece of the tower steel was lifted into place. Several months later, the 420-foot spire split into 18 sections for a total of 758 tons would start the journey from Quebec, Canada, via barge to New York City. On May 3rd, 2013, the final piece of the spire, which houses an architectural beacon light, was lifted into place, raising the building to its symbolic height of 1,776 feet. The beacon light, a combined vision of SOM and lighting designer Claude Engel, would take a collaboration of engineers, theatrical rigging designers, light fabricators, electrical contractors, and steel erectors to develop. The beacon, which contains over 260 50-watt LED modules, produce a combined 2,800,000 lumens of light. Its estimated visibility, up to 26 miles. In 2013, One World Trade Center was thrust back into the spotlight to heavily debate whether the plus 400-foot-tall permanent structure, reaching a height to its architectural top of 1,776 feet, was an antenna or a spire. On November 12th, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Height Committee, consisting of 25 members of architects, engineers, contractors, and academia, declared that One World Trade Center is the nation's tallest building. One World Trade Center would finally earn its bragging right. In early November 2014, One World Trade Center officially opened its doors to anchor tenant Condé Nast. The design process of One World Trade Center began in 2005. Anyone involved will tell you it has been a long journey. Every November in New York City, the marathon is a staple event for New Yorkers. For many years, I had looked on and cheered on as thousands of strangers battled through the 26.2 miles and wondered whether or not I could ever do it. I was not a runner. In fact, when I decided to take on the challenge, I had never run more than a block and did not even own a pair of legitimate sneakers. In 2011, I completed my first marathon through the 5 boroughs of New York. Crossing the Verrazano Bridge, I could not help but smile, seeing One World Trade Center already making its mark at the time on the New York City skyline. As I approached the last quarter of a mile, I spotted my family and friends. I wanted so badly to wave and call out to them, but I had only enough energy left to nod. It had been 18 weeks of strenuous training, and the last 5 miles were unbearable, but I never gave up. It was truly an amazing day. In September 2012, Esquire magazine ran an article titled "The Truth About the World Trade Center." Tishman Construction field super and my colleague, Michael Pinelli, was quoted as saying, "The job is a marathon." All I could think after reading this was, that pretty much sums it up. Many times throughout the past 13 years, it would have been easy to throw in the towel. There have been countless setbacks and challenges, but each day I focused on my role, which was to execute the project and to ensure that the design intent was maintained. It has been an amazing and indescribable opportunity to have played a part in a process for something that has such symbolic meaning to not just New York City, but to the world. World Trade Center. Starting from its origin in 1939, symbolizing world trade through peace, has always been rich in innovation. It stems from great minds, such as David Rockefeller, politicians, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, developers such as Silverstein Properties, architects such as Minoru Yamasaki, Emery Roth & Sons, Dana Libeskind, Santiago Calatrava, Michael Arad, Fumiko Maki, Foster & Partners, Richard Rogers, David Childs, and Skidmore, Owings Merrill. Contractors such as Tishman Construction, responsible for building the initial Twin Towers, 7 World Trade Center, the current 7 World Trade Center, 1 World Trade Center, Towers 2, 3, and 4, and is involved in a joint venture on the Hub Concourse. Anchor tenants such as Moody's and Condé Nast, and countless construction trade, men, women, and design professionals. In the 1970s, the New York skyline was one of a kind. Twin Towers structures were likely the most recognizable buildings in the world. Today, Lower Manhattan is a thriving community full of commercial and small businesses, residents, restaurants, galleries, and occupied open park space. The New York City skyline has returned and once again become a symbol of world trade through peace. I will conclude quoting a statement from Minoru Yamasaki on the World Trade Center. "I feel this way about it. World trade means world peace, and consequently, the World Trade Centers in buildings in New York had a bigger purpose than just to provide room for tenants. The World Trade Center is a living symbol of man's dedication to world peace. Beyond the compelling need to make this a monument to world peace, the World Trade Center should, because of its importance, become a representation of man's belief in humanity, his need for individual dignity, his belief in the cooperation of men, and through a cooperation, his ability to find greatness." Thank you.
Nicole will answer questions if we have any for her. I would point out also, I don't know if you all have checked on our website, there's a piece, an interview with Nicole done by Sydney. Anyway, check it out on the website. It's a nice piece sheet. We just got it up yesterday, I think, or day before. But any questions? Some questions? Larry?
First of all, thanks a lot. It's really interesting and come a long way since Steve.
You were her thesis advisor?
Yes, yes.
Are you taking credit for this?
No. Anyway, one of the things that was really kind of, as horrible as 9/11 was this sort of unpacking of how the building performed or didn't perform, the existing ones. And you talked about different innovations that they used to, improve its strength, improve, egress, things like that. One of the things I remember reading in the kind of debriefing of the disaster was that, it was a steel building and the impact of the planes blew off the fireproofing. This is one of the things I remember reading. And so that made the steel vulnerable. And of course, the fire was the thing that made, in large part, the thing fail. I was wondering if there had been any improvements in the actual adhesion of the fireproofing foam on steel. I always thought, man, that would have been a good idea, given what I read.
Well, they're using a higher grade of fireproofing. I mean, when we were redesigning the 1 World Trade Center, actually really the 7 World Trade Center cores, there was a senior partner in charge, Carl Galeotto at the time, who's now with HOK. But he was very instrumental in working with the New York City Building Department and, you know, looking at possible enhancements. And I named a few of them. I can speak on, you know, behalf of both those buildings. Their egress stairs are, you know, code minimum in New York City is 44 inches wide. Each one of them are 70, the World Trade Center has 72-inch wide egress stairs. The idea is that you could have 2 flows of traffic. Potentially you could have fire department coming up one side where people are egressing out. The one item that was included in the World Trade Center site was they incorporated a dedicated fireman stair. So there's actually a stair that runs the entire height of the building that is dedicated for sole purpose of firemen's use. You know, that does not count towards the egress. They also have a dedicated elevator. So there's been a lot of enhancements. I have to say that, you know, following the events of 9/11, I think everybody, I mean, there's no way that anyone could have ever designed for what occurred on 9/11. It's just, it was unfathomable and impossible to ever think that you could design a building to meet that kind of a criteria. But I have to say, as an architect and somebody that was well vested in New York City at that time, in New York City construction, did raise some concerns about creating too many enhancements in building structure. And if a lot of these things that were being put forward in early stages, you know, they're appropriate for certain buildings, I think down at the World Trade Center for making everybody feel secure. But if those kinds of items had, you know, taken root in New York and become sort of standards to create additional stairs and additional elevators, I think it would have been hard for developers in New York City to move forward and, you know, to really continue to build. And that would have been really, you know, detrimental to the city. So it was good that a lot of things came out of what we learned on 9/11. I mean, photoluminescent was not something. Today in New York, every single building is required. I'm not sure what day it was required by, but every single building in New York is required to comply. Doesn't matter when they were built. You know, every stair, we've actually just, it really forced New York also to go back and re-look at, you know, we hadn't had a code update in years, decades. And the 2009 building code was the first code since 1968. You know, now they've made it a priority to update their code every 3 years. So we just had a new code come out. It was, you know, I guess 9, 10, 11, 12. It started in 2012. It didn't actually get published to 2014 because there was a lot of, you know, everybody, it goes out for a public appeal. People look at it and review it, and then it becomes legislation. But, you know, every 3 years they're going back and relooking at the code. And so I think that those were advancements that came out of what happened on 9/11, you know, as well as creating minimum code stairs, pressurization for all stairs now in high-rise buildings over a certain height. So, you know, we learned a lot about how to build and how to build smarter and, you know, how to protect the occupants in a building, and in any case, in any situation. And that goes from, you know, more typical items like, you know, just a regular fire within a building. And so we've gotten smarter over the years.
Hi. Thanks for coming by the studio earlier. And we saw that we were working on urban residential construction. And lately, the New York Times has been running a series of articles on changes in residential construction in the city and foregrounding these new towers, high-end luxury towers, largely uninhabited, although I guess all rented or sold. And I was just wondering if you had any insights or opinions on that as a new kind of set of towers that are being put up in the city.
Well, I mean, interesting. I'm actually involved since World Trade Center ended. Well, not quite ended yet. I'll probably still be working on this for another decade. It seems like there'll always be work there. But every time if I go to complain about it with anybody at work, I'm like, I have to remember all the good years that this project brought me, and you know, kind of have to continue to battle through it in the years to come. But since that started to kind of come to its completion, my 2 big areas of focus right now, I'm working over on the West Side rail yards, primarily focused on, there's 2 large developers, both Brookfield and the related, the Hudson Yards site. And so working on one of the towers there, which will answer your question, is a high-rise, going to be a 70-story mixed-use building. I just completed the Baccarat Tower, which is across from the MoMA, which is also another high-rise residential high-end tower, and working on a couple of other things, and definitely have my eye set on some of the world's tallest, or I should say, it's the North America's tallest residential building, which was just topped out at 432 Park. And I mean, I think it's very interesting that sort of that avenue of becoming the biggest and the tallest was something that was previously once kind of set for the commercial developers. And as time has gone on, it seems to become a race to the top in many, many markets, one primarily being residential, which has been going on now for about the past decade. And I think what we're going to see in some of the projects that I'm currently involved in are mixed-use buildings, because it becomes to a point where you can't build a building so tall, residents don't want to wait for those elevators. And so they've had to think about creative ways in terms of dealing with vertical transportation. You know, one of those ways is to have, express and local elevators, doing mixed use with hotel and residential. But I think the whole sort of race to the top on the residential side, they're calling Central Park South Billionaires Row. I mean, they're commanding top dollar. I think I read recently that the 157 Tower, which was the Extel development, sold the top penthouse for $100.5 million. It's supposed to be the highest grossing residential building or apartment in New York. And they're looking at ones that are potentially going for even higher they're on the market for. So I think as long as there continues to be that demand, which there certainly is in New York right now, we'll continue to see tall buildings. And as somebody who has a long history in building skyscrapers, I'm glad to see that market has opened up and it's not just the commercial developers. So.
You always ask a very good question.
This time it's not a question, it's more like a comment. So, my high school was actually a few blocks away from the World Trade Center. It's called Stuyvesant High School.
Sure.
You've heard of it?
Sure.
Not. And I just think it was really inspiring to see, like, during the time when I was in high school, from 2010 to 2014, just seeing it from, I guess, not being much to just being built. I think that was really inspiring, and it really touches my heart. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's very sweet.
Okay, any more? All right, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Can you delete that file? Can you delete the file? Oh, yeah, thank you. So nice opportunity to come and
My
speak.
word, it's got to be very difficult to present 10 years of your life.
Yeah, well, it's been more. More than 10 years.
How would the job be? That's just what I had to know. It had to be not just a tiger, but a circus.
Yeah.
You held it together.
Well, it's funny, I was talking to Kyle earlier, and I'm like, early on, I can remember sitting in meetings and simple things like there was a column in the way over by the temporary path station, and so easily the column could have been moved and avoided what is, like right now, our East Plaza, east side of the building, the loading dock, none of it can be completed because it's all like a ripple effect. Like